A commuter train crashes, killing at least one person and injuring dozens more.
It was pretty chaotic, let me tell you, and the people were just in shock.
Now investigators want to know what went wrong. Police blame a teenager for the latest school shooting, what he did before attacking students. Budget battle, Congress reaches a deal, how it affects funding for Planned Parenthood. And the Vatican speaks out about the ongoing struggle in Syria and Iraq, why the humanitarian crisis is getting worse. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, September 29th, 2016. Federal investigators joined the probe of a deadly commuter train crash in Hoboken, New Jersey. One woman on the platform died. More than 100 other people were injured. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Nearby surveillance video shows the doomed train rushing to the station. It crashed into the station, killing one woman on the platform and tossing passengers inside the train.
We have no indication that this is anything other than a tragic accident. We're going to let the law enforcement professionals pursue the facts.
The train engineer is in critical condition and is cooperating with investigators. Two South Carolina firefighters are hailed as heroes after responding to a school playground shooting in a small town between Charlotte and Atlanta. One treated the wounded, the other searched for the shooter. Investigators say a teenage boy shot two students, including a 6-year-old boy, and a teacher at Townville Elementary School after killing his father. A volunteer fireman then pinned him to the ground, preventing anyone else from getting hurt.
I just pray for their families, I pray for those kids. I thank God it wasn't mine, but I feel so bad for them.
The teacher and one student have been treated and released, but the 6-year-old is still hospitalized in critical condition. Last-minute deal-making prevents a government shutdown. President Obama just signed a short-term funding bill. Congress passed it last night, just 2 days before federal funding would have run out. Jason Calvi is on Capitol Hill to tell us about how this affects government funding of Planned Parenthood. Jason.
Lauren, I spoke with members of the conservative House Freedom Caucus. Let's just say they're not happy with this spending bill. It funds the government for about 10 weeks, and it also allows Planned Parenthood to receive more federal funding.
The yeas are 342, the nays are 85. The motion is adopted.
And with that, the federal government stays open through December 9th.
There was no will anywhere to shut the government down. No one really wanted that. It's a high-stakes game of chicken, and Republicans flinched again. So we're kind of 0-6 with Harry Reid on this.
Ohio Representative Warren Davidson is one of the 75 Republican House members who voted against the short-term spending bill.
I think that Paul Ryan got the best deal that he felt that he could get, but I think, I didn't like the deal, so I voted no.
He says one of his big worries was Planned Parenthood would get some of the Zika funding. Senate Democrats put the brakes on Zika funding 3 times this year, worried that Planned Parenthood wouldn't get the money.
We're talking about protecting a woman's right to choose.
With the signing of the bill today, Planned Parenthood is eligible.
I think people realize this is what divided government gets you. You don't always get what you want in divided government.
But the battle isn't over. The debate to fund the government will rage on after the election.
But I really believe that the Senate Democrats made a decision somewhere in this year to slow things down and prevent further activity. My hope is that after the election, they'll drop their political shenanigans and we'll get on to doing the serious business of actually appropriating.
When it comes to the larger issue of Planned Parenthood funding, Congress did pass a bill to defund the organization, but President Obama vetoed that back in January. As far as the presidential candidates, Donald Trump says if he's elected president, he will defund Planned Parenthood as long, Lauren, as they continue to do abortions.
Jason, what about Hillary Clinton's position?
Hillary Clinton is very clear. She's even been endorsed by the organization, by Planned Parenthood.
All right, Jason Calvi reporting from Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. The Supreme Court's next session begins on Monday, and among the cases on the docket, a case concerning the government's refusal to register offensive trademarks. Also, minimum requirements required for public schools when educating learning disabled students, and whether or not lower court rulings make it harder to deport immigrants who've been convicted of crimes. Another one, refunding court costs to convicts who are exonerated. And the court will look at a dispute over state laws that prevent businesses from imposing certain credit card fees. Privacy advocates have filed a brief with the Supreme Court asking justices to uphold a Virginia school district's bathroom privacy policy. EWTN's Catholic News Agency reports more than 8,900 students, parents, and community members asked for protection. They want to make sure students are not exposed to people of the opposite sex in restrooms, locker rooms, and showers. Amy Howe is a reporter for SCOTUS Blog. It's a law blog written by lawyers, and it is fascinating. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Last session involved some controversial cases. It included abortion, immigration, contraception. What can we look for the docket that starts on Monday?
This is not going to be a term so far, at least, where you've got as many controversial, high-profile cases that are going to have us all on the edge of our seats in June. The biggest case is probably a case called Trinity Lutheran versus Pauley. It's a religious liberty case.
And what is that about?
It's a church preschool in Missouri applied for a state grant that provides grants to nonprofits to allow them to resurface their playgrounds using recycled rubber.
Okay.
Tires,
right. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
And the church preschool...
I'm sorry, but I don't know how this is all going to come together.
Exactly,
Go ahead.
exactly.
Okay.
The church preschool did well in the application process, but in the end the state said we can't give you the money essentially because you're a church. We have a provision in our state constitution that prohibits giving aid essentially to religious institutions. And so the church went to court and said this is a violation of our right to freely exercise our religion.
Wow. So that is religious discrimination, or could be seen as religious discrimination. How do you see this case unfolding?
Well, it's going to be a close call, and I think the fact that it's going to be a close call you can see, because this is a case that was actually granted. The justices announced that they would hear oral arguments back in January before Justice Scalia died. And so normally they probably would have had oral arguments either in October or maybe even in November, but the case hasn't been scheduled for oral arguments yet. And there's no way to know what's going on there, but one possibility at least is that the justices want to wait.
Of course.
Because they want to avoid another 4-4 tie.
Well, that's right. The court is now 4-4, mostly deadlocked along party lines. And you have a huge political football battle going on to see whether or not the Senate is going to confirm President Obama's person. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. Do you think that it's going to have a lot of impact who the president elects or nominates, rather, to the Supreme Court?
I think it will. Justice Scalia was one of the court's more conservative members, and so depending on who replaces him, you know, you could see a new majority in some cases. I think, you know, for example, gun rights, which was a popular issue, religious liberty cases.
Pro-life?
Pro-life, certainly, and those are voters who will turn out in presidential elections. But the other thing to keep in mind is that when you talk about the Supreme Court and the presidential election, certainly the next president is likely going to have the opportunity to appoint someone to fill Justice Scalia's seat, but he or she could also have the opportunity to replace at least one more justice. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Or Justice Kennedy.
Is 83, right. Exactly. So there's a lot at stake here in this presidential election.
Is. Well, thank you so much for stopping by, Amy Howe of SCOTUS Blog. Thank you.
Thank you.
A federal appeals court blocks a state ban on voter booth selfies. New Hampshire passed a law banning the election day photographs because it wanted to prevent vote buying and voter coercion. But the appeals court says the ban is an unconstitutional violation of free speech. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. President Obama and the First Lady leave today for Jerusalem. They're joining other world leaders for tomorrow's funeral for Nobel Peace Prize winner and former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres. Former President Bill Clinton arrived today to pay his respects. Hillary Clinton is also scheduled to attend. Peres is credited with the 1993 Oslo Accord, bringing peace to Israelis and the Palestine Liberation Organization. The 93-year-old died yesterday, 2 weeks after suffering a stroke. Russia vows to launch more airstrikes in war-torn Syria, despite calls to stop. Wyatt Goolsbee joins us with more on the growing tension between Moscow and Washington. Wyatt?
Lauren, the Kremlin is not happy with the Obama administration. They're accusing the U.S. of siding with extremists in Syria. This after Secretary of State John Kerry threatens to cut off all contacts with Moscow over the Syrian civil war.
Moscow promises to support Syrian President Bashar Assad as he tries to recapture rebel-held parts of Aleppo. The U.S. accuses Russia of abandoning a week-long ceasefire, instead seeking a military victory for the Syrian dictator.
Secretary Kerry has threatened to end bilateral talks with Russia over Syria, but I can't fathom for the life of me what those talks are producing anyhow.
In a hearing with the Deputy Secretary of State today, both Republican and Democratic senators agreed that the U.S. policy in Syria is not working.
There really are, at this point, very few viable options that make a lot of sense. At this point, Russia has fully filled the vacuums.
And while the U.S. and its allies try to come up with a plan B, thousands are suffering. This cell phone video shows the aftermath of a bombing on civilians in eastern Aleppo. Archbishop Alberto Ortega Martin, the Pope's representative to Iraq and Jordan, says the violence in Syria is spilling over in the region and has resulted in the persecution of Christians.
They are suffering the consequences of one war after another. No? So some of them are tired and they are looking forward to going abroad.
The international president of Doctors Without Borders calls the Syrian conflict a humanitarian crisis. She says the United Nations is not doing enough to protect medical volunteers. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy doesn't see a U.S. military solution to the Syrian civil war, which is why he argues the U.S. should step up its humanitarian support and take in more refugees.
People are fleeing that country, and they are having trouble resettling because the United States, the most powerful country in the world, isn't letting refugees in.
Now, Republicans worry ISIS could use the refugee crisis to slip militants into the U.S., which is why they have not supported taking in more people. Lauren?
Thank you, Wyatt. Cor Unum and other Catholic charities meet with Pope Francis to talk about tragedies in Syria and Iraq. He praised their efforts to help refugees and said that despite best efforts, the situation is getting worse. The Pope blames violent oppression and human rights violations and says the only answer to enduring the suffering or ending the suffering is Christ. Coming up, the Pope heads to Eastern Europe. We'll have a preview of his trip. And improving parish life, one author's idea to reinvigorate the church. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A group of heavily armed men attacked 3 priests in Nigeria. One is hospitalized after being shot in the head. Another is injured, and the third, the rector of Tanzi Major Seminary, was kidnapped. The kidnappers are demanding money. A Vatican news agency says the Catholic bishops in Nigeria will not pay. More tension with the new Filipino president. He cancels joint military exercises with the U.S. Earlier this month, President Obama turned down a meeting with Rodrigo Duterte, who cursed Obama. Duterte says he wants to establish new trade and commercial alliances with Russia and China, even though China and the Philippines are arguing over territory in the South China Sea. Pope Francis departs tomorrow for a 3-day trip to Georgia and Azerbaijan, the 16th international trip of his papacy. Alan Holdren, the Rome bureau chief for Catholic News Agency, will be traveling with the Holy Father. Alan, what is Pope Francis's mission for this trip in each country?
Well, his Secretary of State said in an interview today to Vatican Television that he's going for a trip of encounter, peace, and reconciliation. These are 2 nations that are sandwiched between Russia to the north and Turkey and Iran to the south. There have been a lot of conflicts in these places, some still ongoing. There's what the people of Georgia say a Russian occupation that is still happening today. And in Azerbaijan, they're in conflict with Armenia. It's a conflict that's gone on for the last 25 years. They say there that it's a great sign that the Pope is coming after having been to Armenia in June, that he's going to Azerbaijan now to show that he's not taking sides.
You know, the percentage of Roman Catholics, I believe, in these countries, and correct me if I'm wrong, is less than 1%. So other than these ecumenical and interreligious objectives, what is his outreach to the Catholics going to be?
Well, he is going to be reaching out to Orthodox Christians there in Georgia, and he'll be meeting with Muslims, who are the majority there in Azerbaijan. Besides that, he'll be reaching out to the Catholic community, which in Georgia is over 100,000 people. He has a mass in a stadium there. He's meeting with workers of charity. He'll also be reaching out to the Assyrian Chaldean community, who speak the language of Christ, Aramaic, who have been there for more than a millennium. So that's going to be a very special encounter for them. He's also going to be in Azerbaijan meeting with the local Salesian priests. There are just 7 of them that serve a local population of just 570 Catholics, Lauren.
Do you
very
expect-
special moments here for the Catholics ahead.
Do you expect a surprise visit?
There could be something. It doesn't appear to be anything on the schedule. There isn't much time for surprises like Pope Francis likes to make. But in Georgia in particular, they really wanted the Pope to go to what they call the occupation line, this moving line that Russia controls in their north, in this occupied territory that they say is still theirs. It's only 40 kilometers, which is about 25 miles outside of the capital city there. It is just a short trip away. The Pope could do that, should he choose to do so. They don't expect it to happen, but the people there in Georgia say that if he were to do that, it would mean as much to them as the Pope saying the word genocide when he was in Armenia, which really was a strong statement.
Alan Holdren is the Rome Bureau Chief of the Catholic News Agency. Thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you, Lauren.
And new tonight, Colombia's president says Pope Francis is planning to visit his country early next year. Colombia just signed a peace treaty on Monday with FARC, the group involved in a long-time civil war. A Catholic businessman studied 244 parishes nationwide to determine what makes them thrive. The churches were diverse in size, finances, and racial composition. He boiled his findings down to 4 essential practices for his new book. William E. Simon Jr. is chairman and founder of Parish Catalyst, a group that helps build vibrant Catholic parishes. And he's the author of a new book, Great Catholic Parishes, A Living Mosaic. He's also the son of President Nixon's former Secretary of Treasury. Bill, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lauren.
This is a great book, really. Current trends say Catholics are departing parishes in moderate but consistent numbers. How can that change?
Well, it can definitely change through 4 things, Lauren. We wrote a book, as you mentioned, Great Catholic Parishes. It's the most exhaustive study of vibrant parishes ever undertaken in the Catholic world, and it points to 49 findings grouped in 4 categories.
Wow, that's a lot of information.
Let's talk about these 4 categories.
Okay, highlights, please.
Leadership. Leadership, of course, is first and foremost the pastor, but these days it's shared leadership with lay people. Second, Sunday experience. Now, we know that from having children.
I show up late with kids all the time.
Well, Sunday experience just doesn't start on Sunday. It starts on Monday, goes through the week with small groups and other activities that parishioners can take part in.
Give me an example of that. What does that look like?
Well, a great example, in fact, at our parish in Santa Monica, California, St. Monica's, there's a Bible study group called Alpha. And Alpha is in Catholic parishes all over the country. It's a great way for parishioners to get to know each other. One person has said that the larger a parish gets, the smaller it must become.
So you need groups like things happening after church as well.
Oh boy, absolutely. And especially for those of us that have younger children, the idea that after Mass, maybe there could be some food.
Who doesn't do that? I'll take a donut anytime.
Absolutely, especially on Sunday night after 5:30 Mass.
That's right. Now, you have 2 others. We got to leadership and then we got to fellowship.
That's right. And then we got to spiritual formation. That's our 3rd theme. And that is one of my favorites because we all know that sometimes you're not paying attention in church. Well, the fact is that vibrant parishes encourage discipleship and spiritual growth. And the 4th area, Lauren, is evangelization. We now look with great admiration on our African brethren that have great evangelization. We can get better in this country, and these 244 vibrant parishes do exactly that.
All right. Well, these are wonderful tips and advice. The book is Great Catholic Parishes, How 4 Essential Practices Make Them Thrive. Thank you so much, Bill Simon, for stopping by.
Thank you, Lauren.
Up next, an Olympic celebration. Athletes arrive at the White House. And The Loser Letters, a new faith-based play, makes its debut at the Catholic University of America. Today we celebrate the feast day for the archangels, Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. Pope Francis says they can support us in the struggle against evil and guide us safely along the roads of our lives. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Olympic costs skyrocket. Tokyo says it's on track to spend $30 billion to host the 2020 Games, and a Japanese panel is calling for cost cutting. Also today, Rome's City Council voted to scrap its bids on the 2024 Games, citing cost concerns. President Obama welcomes U.S. Olympians to the White House. He honored members of the 2016 Olympic and Paralympic teams, singling out athletes like Simone Biles and Michael Phelps. The Olympians then presented President Obama with a signed surfboard. A satire of the prevalence of atheism, adapted for stage, makes its theatrical debut tonight. The Loser Letters is slated for 10 performances at the Catholic University of America here in Washington. I recently sat down with the novel's author on what's being called a creative response to radical secularism. Mary Eberstadt is the author of The Loser Letters, a comic tale of life, death, and atheism. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me back, Lauren.
Okay, what does this mean? Comic tale of life, death, and atheism. Tell me about the play.
It's intended to be fun, and it's also intended to make people think. The Loser Letters is a very countercultural book, and it's a countercultural play. It's about a girl who is searching for the big questions in life and their answers. And she has found herself in a spot that a lot of young people get into. She is an unbeliever. And the play explores the reasons for her unbelief from a very unusual point of view.
You talk about the new atheism. What are some examples of it impacting young Catholics? And that comes up as a theme.
Yes, about 10 years ago, the new atheists were riding high on bestseller lists. There were lots of books, lots of talk in the air about godlessness. They're not in the headlines anymore, but I think that there was a trickle-down effect of all that, and I think they gave the impression that to be cool was to be on the side of unbelief, and I think a lot of young people especially have absorbed that message unconsciously, and that's part of what we're trying to address with this play.
And I love how you've put Olympic silver medal gymnast Chelsea Memel in there, portraying the shadow. That brings in culture from outside the religious community. Why did you do that, and what has been your role with the cast?
Well, Jeffrey Fisk, the playwright who also adapted the play, was responsible for bringing in all this great talent. There's a choreographer with 14 Helen Hayes Awards, for example, and Jeffrey himself is well known around the country for having adapted and directed the long-running version of the Screwtape Letters. So we have a lot of bells and whistles that we hope pull people in and make it fun to watch.
Mary Eberstadt is author of The Loser Letters, a comic tale of life, death, and atheism. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Well, that does it for us for today and for the EW News Nightly team. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We leave you tonight with images from today's Mass in St. Peter's Basilica, where 30 seminarians from the North American College in Rome were ordained as deacons. Cardinal Sean O'Malley, the Archbishop of Boston, presided at the Mass. The seminarians will be ordained to the priesthood next year. Good night and God bless.